Of course, today also marks the 31st anniversary of the passing of Joe Slovo, a pivotal figure in South Africa's liberation struggle. His legacy has been commemorated at a time of significant political tension within the ANC-led Tripartite Alliance, as well as major international crises, including the situation in Venezuela. Well, let's talk about these issues with Dr. Ongama Mtimka, lecturer at the Department of History and Political Studies in Nelson Mandela Bay, well, at the Nelson Mandela Bay University. A very good afternoon to you, and thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Mtimka. Let's perhaps begin with Joe Slovo, the man. We can't, obviously, in the few minutes we have, do justice to who he was, a struggle stalwart who joined long before it became fashionable for many people to join the liberation struggle. And of course, it changed his life, or the course of his life, forever.
Good afternoon to you and your viewers. Thank you for having me this afternoon, and blessings for 2026. Yes, Joe Slovo, in the hearts and minds of liberation fighters and the average South African during apartheid, was endeared greatly because of the great sacrifices and the great role that he played in both in the ANC and the SACP, including as a key founder of Umkhonto weSizwe, along with Nelson Mandela, somebody whom even guerrillas that joined the liberation struggle learned to endear as the chief of staff of the Umkhonto weSizwe, and a person whom the apartheid government had actually built a caricature around as the mastermind behind the armed efforts of the ANC in South Africa. So as somebody who is a great figure in the struggle for liberation in South Africa.
Now, the 31st commemorative event comes at a time when both parties he served with distinction, the ANC and the SACP, are at loggerheads in the main at this time over the decision by the SACP to contest elections. And this played itself out as the ANC president was about to address the event. You heard SACP members and supporters singing, saying they don't want the GNU. He had to stand there for a while and couldn't speak, while the chairperson of the party, Thulas Nxesi, had to try and stop those people from singing and allow the ANC president to deliver his tribute on behalf of the ANC. I don't know what you made of that particular episode.
I think a number of things can be said about how the SACP is approaching its venturing into electoral politics. We have seen a lot of splinters from the ANC, and these are usually, dominated by rhetoric that is, clearly separation rhetoric. We no longer want you. You are sellouts. We are breaking away, and the works. But what is quite interesting about the SACP is that it is, even as it is assertive about its contestation of state power in the local government elections this year, it's reassuring both the alliance and the importance of it, as well as its participation in the alliance. And if you listened to the speeches today, both from the leftist allies of the ANC, be it the SACP, COSATU, as well as SANCO, all of them are reaffirming both the support for the SACP to contest elections, while also remaining in the alliance, but appreciating how the terrain has shifted and needs for all of them to work to ensure that the alliance remains. So that moment, as the president was coming to speak, was truly reflective of this. One may say confusion, another person may say complexity, because on one level the song was sung Asifuni GNU for some time, and then Ramaphosa Urata Kaufela, which shows that there's a lot that the SACP is still engaged in to interpret what this means, what contesting state power means, while they remain a member of the alliance, which they say is important. And I'm saying, Vuyo, it's different from the split of COPE, the split of EFF, the split of MK Party. It's an interesting way. It's almost as though the SACP is saying, we too want to come to the table with tangible electoral support when we discuss coalitions, while we remain. So it's a more nuanced position that they are taking. It doesn't mean it's easy. It's a lot. It's going to be complex. It's going to be confusing, but it's something that's different, and it should be noted as such.
But I mean, isn't there an inherent contradiction there, or as some people have suggested, an attempt to to have to have their way to an extent, but on the other hand, not wanting to go all out in case the critics of that decision are proven right in that, I mean, this is a terrible mistake on the part of the party. So they want to sort of try and do both.
Yeah, so I believe that the timing, what is a mistake about the contestation of state power on the part of the SACP is not the idea itself, but its timing. The best time for it could have been in the early 2000s, when the decision was first taken anyway, but they kept unhinging their bets on ANC presidents whom they believed would go on to reform alliance politics. The horse has bolted almost, because despite several meetings, they have committed to this idea of contesting state power. And I do think that they do have a point, in the sense that when discussions about coalitions were taking place at a national level, you couldn't really say this is the seats that the SACP is bringing to the table. But they are right in acknowledging that the political identity of communism in South Africa developed intertwined with liberation politics. Slovo negotiated the same thing that they are negotiating. You've had instances where Chris Hani, among others, were in fact explaining the differences between the SACP and the ANC, but the strategic importance before Zani became a staunch communist that was, high in the echelons of the SACP, explaining how they were not a gambit of the KGB. They were not a junior part of the SACP as the ANC in exile. So it's not it's a complex matter. It's contradictory. But for me, I think that the political strategy of saying you could go to coalitions with tangible seats, it does have some basis, to be looked at, because it would either elevate the position of the SACP when coalitions are being negotiated, or show that it doesn't have support.
Well, back in the day when this idea of contesting elections on their own was first mooted, the ANC was quite strong. So they knew that it was a non-starter. And several things have happened since. The ANC's support has waned quite significantly to a point where it no longer has a majority in parliament, for example, and has lost quite a number of municipalities to the opposition or coalition of opposition parties. And now that the situation, the ANC is in a much worse position than it had ever even imagined. The SACP is now sort of smelling blood, so to speak, and perhaps opportunistically now feels a little more buoyed and in a much better position to contest elections. Of course, there are people who say, even with that, within that context, it is still very weak and won't be able to garner any meaningful or significant support. But add to that the fact that you have had your MKs and your EFFs and others eating away from the ANC support, which I suppose would give the SACP a sense that they are indeed in a much better position than they were only years ago. But there are those who still say, notwithstanding this little background that I've sketched, it is still in a much weaker position. They won't be able to even begin, to take away from the ANC's support.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of experiments on the left in the past, say, 20 years or so. In fact, maybe 17 years. First with NUMSA's United Front, launched at a time of a local government election that proved mostly disastrous, save for successes here and there in the Eastern Cape. And in fact, those successes were not in areas where you had huge working class, industrial working class representation. Well, they were, but I mean, you've got PE, Nelson Mandela Bay, a little bit in George, if I remember well, and then in Stegspruit. And these were movements that were aligned to the United Front. Then you had the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party. That was a complete disaster. So there has been experiments, but what we have seen also is that the rise of the EFF and the MK party does show that there are some opportunities on the left of the ANC, but these opportunities have seen more nationalist parties with radically sounding rhetoric succeed than workers' parties or parties that had an overtly communist orientation. Yes, many people would say Malema, and the EFF have had this Marxist-Leninist orientation, but I strongly believe that the coming out of a youth league and the nationalist politics of the ANC are what made, and the charisma of Julius Malema, are what made the EFF succeed more than the inherent appeal of their policy offering to South Africans. Here, I think that the policy choice among rank and file South African is somewhere in that continuum from center left to center right. So you're quite right in pointing out that, yes, it's opportune time, having seen parties like the EFF and MK party, but also what happened with the United Front, as well as the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' parties, are two contradictory outcomes from parties that are on the left side of the ANC. But it's important for them, if they are not convinced that they are getting a better deal in alliance reconfigurations that have been a subject of discussion for the entire democratic period. It helps to see if that alliance has got tangible seats in government, whether this reconfiguration can ultimately work, driven mostly not just by the political alliance that has been there throughout history, but also by the tangible representation. But the big issue, and I think that this is what puts the SACP at a 50-50 as to whether or not they are going to follow through with this. At a national level, to have candidates that are going to campaign in wards, the ANC and the SACP have been won. So it's going to be interesting whether, when they make assessments on the basis of potential to attract ward councillors, whether they are going to eventually go ahead with this decision, because that's where the rubber would meet the road. Because much of the people who are in ANC branches are SACP people, and vice versa. So it's going to be interesting. I'm saying, at least in terms of the messaging today, they are very assertive about the right to continue to contest, but also reassuring to the ANC, which for me is showing how they are able to handle complexity. But when the practical realities of electioneering, money allocations and other resources, it may still force them to go back to the drawing board to say, do we really continue or do we not?
Well, we've seriously run out of time. I would have wanted to explore one or two other issues with you, Dr. Mtimka, because, of course, I mean, it's people have a whole range of opinions as to whether your your MK parties and your EFFs are indeed as left as they profess to be. That's another matter for another day. But also, I mean, a relevant point would perhaps be also be the fact that these two parties, if you take them as an example, your MK party and your EFFs are led by, larger than life personalities who are actually, the EFF is, Julius Malema, in the same way that the MK party is Jacob Zuma, and it became apparent. I mean, if you look at the support they've garnered, the EFF over the years and the MK party in the year or so that they have been in existence, it's clear what the impact of those larger-than-life personalities have been. You look at the decisions that they've taken, how they run those parties. But you and I will explore this matter further as we go forward. Dr. Ongama Mtimka, on the back, of course, of the commemorative event that's being held where the ANC, the SACP, and COSATU are remembering Joe Slovo, a stalwart of both the Congress movement, but also of the South African Communist Party. Some scenes there where the apparent differences between the two played themselves out, but in the end, Cyril Ramaphosa, the ANC president, was able to deliver his speech, and the SACP has committed to attending the ANC's 114th anniversary celebrations to be held in Rustenburg